The church was filled with soft music and the scent of roses that lined the aisles, every petal carefully chosen to match the grandness of the day. Guests sat expectantly, their eyes glimmering with joy and curiosity, whispering about the beauty of the bride who was said to look like a vision in white. The stained glass windows bathed the room in golden light, casting colors across the polished floor where a young woman stood, trembling in her gown. Her hands clutched the bouquet tighter than she realized, knuckles pale against the delicate blooms. She kept looking toward the tall wooden doors at the back of the church, each passing second carving deeper into her chest. He should have been here by now. The groom, her groom. The priest shifted uneasily at the altar, glancing discreetly at the clock on the wall, but the whispers among the crowd grew louder with every tick of the second hand. The bride's parents exchanged glances from the front row, their smiles stiff and forced, as though they too sensed something had gone terribly wrong. The bride swallowed hard, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. A thin sheen of sweat dampened her brow beneath the veil, and she forced her lips into a faint smile, trying to mask the terror spreading inside her. Minutes dragged into an eternity. Each time the heavy doors creaked, hope surged in her chest, only to shatter when no one appeared. Guests began to murmur more openly, cruel speculations slipping from lips that moments before had been filled with praise. Maybe he changed his mind, one whispered. Didn't he look uneasy last night? Another asked. Each word cut through her like a blade. The bouquet in her hand trembled as tears gathered at the corner of her eyes, threatening to spill. The priest finally stepped closer, speaking in a low voice that carried just enough for her to hear. My child, are you certain he is coming? His words, though gentle, were a hammer striking the fragile glass of her hopes. She tried to answer but no sound came out. Her throat closed, her lips quivered, and at last the dam broke. A single tear slid down her cheek, betraying her struggle to remain composed in front of the watching world. The guests shifted in their seats, restless now, sensing a scandal unfolding before their eyes. Some shook their heads, pity etched across their faces, while others relished the drama, leaning in to catch every detail. Her humiliation grew heavier, pressing her shoulders down, making her wish the earth would open and swallow her whole. Abandoned. The word echoed in her mind like a cruel chant. Her groom had left her standing here in front of everyone, wrapped in silk and lace, a bride without a husband. Her knees threatened to give way beneath her. She swayed slightly, clutching the edge of the altar for balance, the bouquet slipping from her fingers and scattering petals across the marble floor. A gasp rose from the crowd, some rushing forward, but she shook her head, refusing to be touched. This was her shame to bear, and she would endure it alone. And then, amid the whispers, the pity, and the stunned silence, a deep, commanding voice cut through the air like a blade. If your groom abandoned you, the words carried, silencing the restless crowd. The bride's head snapped up, eyes wide and glistening, searching for the source. There, at the edge of the aisle, stood a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit, his presence radiating authority and composure. Every gaze turned toward him, shock rippling through the room. The man stepped forward, his eyes locked firmly on hers, steady and unwavering. Then marry me instead, he finished, his voice calm but firm, filled with a conviction that stole the breath from her lungs. The church froze. Time, itself seemed to hold its breath. The young bride's tears glistened beneath her veil as she stared at the stranger, this millionaire she had barely known existed until this moment, realizing her life had just been rewritten in a single sentence. Gasps rippled through the church like a sudden storm. Some guests clutched their pearls, others turned to one another in disbelief, their murmurs buzzing louder than the soft music still playing in the background. The bride stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, unable to comprehend the words she had just heard. Her groom had left her, humiliation burned her from within. But now, before she could even collapse beneath the weight of that shame, this man, this stranger in a sharp suit and confident stance, had offered her something that sounded impossible. Marry me instead. Her parents exchanged stunned glances, her mother pressing a hand to her mouth as if to contain a cry, while her father half rose from his seat, torn between outrage and relief. The priest blinked several times, unsure if he should speak or stay silent, clearly as shaken as everyone else. The bride's fingers tightened around the altar rail, knuckles whitening, while her heart hammered so violently she felt faint. Her voice refused to come, tangled somewhere between disbelief and fear. The man didn't falter. He walked slowly up the aisle, each step echoing in the hush, his gaze never leaving hers. He wasn't mocking her, nor did his eyes carry the sharp sting of pity like the others around them. No, his expression was steady, protective, almost defiant, as if he were daring anyone in the church to laugh at her again. When he finally stopped at her side, he inclined his head slightly, lowering his voice enough that only she and the priest could hear. "You don't deserve to be humiliated like this," he said firmly, his tone softer now but still carrying strength. "If he had the audacity to abandon you here, in front of everyone, then allow me to stand beside you. Let me protect your dignity." Her lips parted, trembling. She wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse, but instead she found herself staring into his eyes, searching for any trace of mockery, any hint that this was some cruel joke. But there was none, only sincerity. Still, the idea seemed absurd. Marry him, now, in front of all these people. She barely knew who he was. Yet the alternative loomed heavy and cruel. To walk away alone, defeated, her name whispered about in scandal for months, her heart carrying the weight of betrayal forever. The guests, unable to restrain themselves, erupted in whispers once again. "This is madness," hissed one. "He's out of his mind. Perhaps he's in love with her," another murmured with a gasp. Others leaned forward, curiosity gleaming in their eyes. The tension in the room thickened until it was nearly suffocating. Her mother stood, her voice breaking as she whispered across the aisle, "Say yes, darling. Don't let them see you broken." Her father, though hesitant, gave a slow, reluctant nod, as though recognizing that this man's offer, strange as it was, might be the only lifeline left for his daughter. The bride's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. She turned back to the millionaire, her vision blurred with tears. His hand extended toward her, palm open, steady and unwavering. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, the stares, the murmurs, the pounding of her own heart. And then, with trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. The church erupted into gasps, some shocked, some relieved. The priest, utterly bewildered, raised his hands to quiet the commotion. "Do you mean this, both of you?" he asked, his voice quivering. The man gave a firm nod, his grip tightening protectively around the bride's hand. "I do," he said without hesitation. The bride's voice was a fragile whisper, almost lost beneath the sound of her racing pulse. "Yes, I do." A wave of stunned silence swept through the church. It was done, the choice had been made. The ceremony, though shaken from its original path, would not end in disgrace. Instead, it was to continue in the most unexpected way imaginable. The bride, still trembling, stood taller, clinging to the stranger who had stepped into her nightmare and offered her an escape. As the priest cleared his throat, gathering his composure to proceed, the millionaire leaned closer to her, his words just for her alone. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. And for the first time since the doors failed to open, her heart steadied, not with certainty, but with the fragile spark of hope. The murmurs in the church swelled into a chorus of disbelief as the priest steadied himself, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the open book before him. The millionaire's hand remained clasped firmly around the bride's, anchoring her in place as if to keep her from drifting away in the storm of judgment swirling around them. Her heart thudded in her chest, the sound deafening in her ears, yet she forced herself to breathe, to stand tall beneath the veil that concealed her tear-streaked face. The priest hesitated, his eyes flicking between the two of them, clearly questioning the sanity of what was unfolding. "Very well," he said slowly, his voice trembling but formal, "if you are both certain, then let us proceed." The guests leaned forward, their expressions ranging from scandalized to enthralled. Some shook their heads, whispering that this was outrageous, while others watched with wide-eyed fascination, unable to look away from the spectacle. A woman in the back clutched her husband's arm, whispering, "This will be in every newspaper by morning." Another smirked, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction at the drama. But through it all, the bride forced her gaze upward, meeting the man's steady eyes. His calm was unwavering, and in that calm she found just enough courage to nod when the priest prompted her. The vows began. Each word felt surreal, as though she were standing outside her own body, listening to someone else speak. The priest asked the millionaire if he would take this woman as his wife, and without pause, his voice rang clear, "I will." The words sent a ripple of astonishment through the church. No hesitation, no faltering, only certainty. When it was her turn, her throat tightened. Her lips trembled as she tried to form the words. Images of the empty aisle flashed in her mind, her groom's absence like a blade in her chest. But then she felt the reassuring squeeze of the hand holding hers, firm and unyielding. Drawing on that strength, she whispered, "I will." Though her voice quivered, it carried enough strength to echo through the hushed silence. Rings were called for, and a stunned groomsman stumbled forward, still clutching the pair meant for the vanished groom. Awkwardly, he handed them over, his eyes darting nervously between the couple. The millionaire took the ring and slid it onto her finger with deliberate care, his touch gentle, yet his expression unreadable. Then came her turn, her hands shaking so much she almost dropped the small band. But she steadied herself, sliding it onto his finger, her heart pounding as if sealing a fate she could barely comprehend. The priest, though still visibly shaken, carried on, his voice gaining strength as the ceremony neared its end. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The words landed like thunder in her chest. Husband and wife. She felt her breath hitch, her pulse racing wildly. The priest gestured toward the groom, the man who had been a stranger only moments ago. "You may kiss the bride." The room erupted in whispers again, but the millionaire stepped closer, lifting her veil with a slow, deliberate motion. His eyes held hers, not with the wild passion of a lover but with the steady, grounding gaze of a man making a promise. He bent his head and pressed the lightest kiss to her forehead, reverent and gentle, a gesture that silenced the crowd more effectively than anything else could have. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then growing louder as some guests chose to embrace the spectacle rather than reject it. Others remained stiff and silent, their eyes narrowed with judgment. But the bride heard none of it. All she felt was the warmth of his hand in hers and the strange steadiness his presence brought. Together they turned to face the aisle, the sea of faces staring back at them. Her legs wobbled, and for a moment she feared she might fall, but his grip tightened, guiding her forward. Step by step, they walked through the waves of whispers, her veil trailing behind her like the remnants of a life she had just left behind. The doors of the church opened wide, and sunlight streamed in, spilling over them as they crossed the threshold. The crowd followed with their eyes, some with awe, others with disbelief. But in that moment, as she emerged into the light with him by her side, she realized something had shifted inside her. She was no longer the abandoned bride left humiliated at the altar. She was a wife, unexpectedly, bewilderingly, but undeniably so. And though uncertainty clawed at her chest, the stranger beside her whispered softly as they stepped into the world beyond, "You will not regret this." The sunlight outside the church was blinding, almost too sharp against the storm that still raged in the bride's heart. Cameras from local reporters and curious onlookers flashed, their bulbs capturing every second of the most scandalous wedding anyone had ever witnessed. Guests poured out behind them, some still gasping, others already pulling out their phones to spread the story like wildfire. The whispers chased her like shadows. "She married a stranger, he's a millionaire, isn't he? This will ruin her," but the man beside her blocked it all out. His arm slipped around her shoulders, guiding her firmly yet gently toward the sleek black car waiting at the curb. The chauffeur opened the door, and he ushered her inside first, shielding her from the crowd with his broad frame before climbing in himself. The door shut, and suddenly, the chaos outside dulled into muffled noise. Inside the car, silence hung heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. The bride sat stiffly, her hands clutched together in her lap, staring down at the ring now circling her finger. It gleamed mockingly in the sunlight filtering through the tinted glass, a reminder of the vows she had spoken only moments ago. For a long moment, she couldn't bring herself to look at him. The enormity of what had just happened weighed on her chest until she thought she might suffocate. Married. To a man she barely knew. To a man who had stepped into her humiliation and rewritten the story with one bold declaration. Finally, she found the courage to speak, her voice low and shaky. Why would you do this?" He leaned back in his seat, his expression calm, though his eyes softened as he studied her. "Because no woman deserves to be abandoned at the altar. Not you. Not today. I couldn't stand by and watch you be humiliated." His tone carried no arrogance, only a quiet conviction, as if he had simply done what was necessary. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time not from shame. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "But you don't even know me. You don't know who I am. What if I was a mistake?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and she turned away, staring out at the blur of the city through the car window. He paused, his gaze steady on her profile. "A mistake," he repeated softly, almost as though testing the word. Then he shook his head. "No, a mistake is a man who makes promises and runs when it matters most. I won't run. I don't make promises I can't keep." The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket, heavy but strangely comforting. For the first time since the doors of the church had failed to open, she felt her breathing ease. She turned back toward him slowly, her veil falling to the side, revealing her tear-streaked face fully. He didn't flinch. He simply held her gaze, unafraid of her brokenness. The car wound through the streets, the chatter of the city outside a stark contrast to the strange, fragile silence between them. She wanted to ask him everything, his name, his story, why he had even been at the wedding, but the words tangled on her tongue. Instead, she simply whispered, "What now?" A faint smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained serious. "Now," he said, "we start a new chapter. It may not be the one you planned, but it doesn't have to be the end of your story. It could be the beginning." His words lodged deep in her chest, both terrifying and oddly reassuring. She turned back to the window, her fingers brushing the ring again, and for the first time she allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, this wild, unplanned leap could lead her somewhere she was meant to go. The car slowed as they pulled into the long driveway of an estate she hadn't realized was their destination. The gates opened to reveal sprawling gardens and a mansion that looked like something from a dream. Her breath caught in her throat as she whispered, "This is yours." He glanced at her, his tone steady, almost casual. "Ours now." The word struck her with the force of a storm. "Ours." Her heart stuttered, the uncertainty and fear mixing with the faintest spark of hope. She had walked into the church expecting a fairy tale ending, only to be abandoned. Yet here she was, stepping into a story far stranger, with a man who might be her greatest risk, or the unexpected miracle she never knew she needed. As the car doors opened and he offered her his hand once more, she realized that whatever came next, her life would never be the same again.